My name is Thea Lindgren, and the night my family finally called me a failure in front of 200 people was not the night they broke me. They had started breaking me 15 years earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when I came home from school with 3 college brochures in my backpack and found my future sitting on the kitchen table like it belonged to someone else. I was 17 then, a junior in high school, the kind of girl teachers called responsible because they did not know responsible was just another word for lonely when no one at home was paying attention. I had a 3.6 GPA, a part-time job shelving books at the town library, and a savings jar hidden behind my winter sweaters where I kept birthday money, tip money, and every dollar I could convince myself not to spend. But the real money, the money that made me believe college was possible, came from my grandparents. Grandpa Earl and Grandma Ruth had started a fund for me when I was little. Every Christmas, every birthday, every special occasion, they would press an envelope into my hand and say, "For your future, Thea." I believed them. I believed futures could be protected if enough people loved you. That afternoon, I walked into the house and knew something was wrong before anyone spoke. My mother, Gloria, sat at the kitchen table with her reading glasses low on her nose, papers spread neatly in front of her. My father, Ray, sat in his recliner, staring at a television that was not even turned on. Upstairs, my younger sister Vanessa had music playing so loudly the ceiling seemed to hum. Mom did not ask how school was. She did not smile. She only said, "Sit down, Thea." I sat. She slid a glossy brochure toward me. Whitmore Academy. Private school. 40 minutes away. I had heard of it. Everyone had. It was the kind of school parents bragged about at church when they wanted other parents to feel smaller. Vanessa got accepted, Mom said. I looked at the smiling students on the cover. Okay. Dad cleared his throat but still did not look at me. Mom tapped the tuition page with one polished nail. $14,000 a year. My stomach tightened. That's expensive, I said, even though what I meant was, please tell me this has nothing to do with me. Mom folded her hands. We're enrolling her in the fall. I stared at the number again. 14,000. My voice came out thin. That's my college fund. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just silence. The kind that confirms what everyone already decided before you entered the room. I looked at Dad. You used my college fund? He shifted like the chair had suddenly become uncomfortable. Vanessa needs it more, sweetheart. You're strong. You'll figure something out. Strong. That was what they called me whenever they wanted to take something from me and not feel guilty. Mom added, your sister is struggling in public school. Whitmore could change everything for her. And what about me? I asked. Don't be dramatic. There it was. The family prayer. Don't be dramatic. Don't be selfish. Don't make this difficult. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. Grandpa and Grandma saved that money for me. Mom's face hardened. They saved it for this family. No, I said. They saved it for my future. Vanessa came halfway down the stairs then, wearing fuzzy socks and holding her phone, smiling when she saw the brochure. She looked excited, innocent, completely unaware that her new beginning had been purchased with my ending. I wanted someone to say my name like I mattered. No one did. That night, I sat on my bed staring at my college brochures until the words blurred. Around midnight, I pulled a duffel bag from my closet and packed jeans, shirts, my toothbrush, my notebooks, and the $83 from my drawer. Everything I owned fit into one bag, which told me more about my place in that house than any argument could. When I walked downstairs, Mom and Dad were still awake. They watched me place my house key on the counter. Dad said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I don't know." Mom sighed, almost bored. "You'll be back. You always need us eventually." I waited for something else. An apology. A hug. A reason to stay. Nothing came. So I opened the front door and stepped into the cold night air. I looked back once at the glowing porch light, at the house where I had spent 17 years trying to earn love that kept moving farther away. Then I turned and walked down the driveway with one bag, $83, and no idea that leaving that night would become the first honest thing I ever did for myself. The first night after I left home, I slept on a pull-out couch that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old pizza boxes. It belonged to my best friend, Kayla. When I knocked on her door just after midnight carrying a duffel bag and trying very hard not to cry, she took one look at me and stepped aside without asking a single question. That was the thing about real friends. They didn't need explanations before offering kindness. Her mother worked night shifts as a nurse and wouldn't be home until morning. Kayla handed me a blanket, pointed to the couch, and said, "You can tell me everything tomorrow." Then she turned off the lamp and left me alone with my thoughts. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother sliding the Whitmore Academy brochure across the table. I heard my father saying Vanessa needed the money more than I did. Most of all, I heard my mother's voice telling me I'd come back because I always needed them. The next morning, I woke up determined to prove her wrong. The problem was determination doesn't pay rent. It doesn't buy food. It doesn't tell a 17-year-old girl how to build a life from scratch. For the first few weeks, I stayed with Kayla's family while I figured things out. Her mother, Denise, never treated me like a burden. Every evening after work, she left an extra plate at dinner without making a big deal about it. One night, after noticing me counting the cash in my wallet for the third time, she sat across from me and said, "You don't need to have everything figured out this week, Thea." I laughed bitterly. "That's easy for you to say." "No," she replied. "It's easy for me to say because I've lived long enough to know it's true." Those words stayed with me. A month later, I took my GED exam. Walking into that testing center felt like walking into a courtroom where my future was on trial. I kept thinking about all the people in town who would hear I'd dropped out and assume my parents were right. But when the results came back, I passed with scores high enough to qualify for several scholarship opportunities. I remember sitting in my car afterward and crying harder than I had the night I left home. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time I had proof that my life wasn't over. It was just different. A few weeks later, I got hired at Briarwood Diner. The breakfast shift started at 4 in the morning, which meant waking up at 3. By 5, I was carrying coffee pots between booths filled with truck drivers, construction workers, and retirees who complained about everything except their refill speed. The work was exhausting, but it paid enough to keep me moving forward. I learned quickly that people reveal a lot about themselves over eggs and coffee. Some customers were generous. Others treated waitresses like furniture. I smiled through all of it because every tip went into the future I was building. In the afternoons, I enrolled at Millbrook Community College. Most days I went straight from work to class without stopping. I was tired all the time. There were afternoons when I sat in the parking lot fighting the urge to drive away because I couldn't imagine surviving another lecture on 2 hours of sleep. But every time I thought about quitting, I pictured my parents explaining to people that I couldn't make it on my own. That image pushed me through. During my second week at Millbrook, I met Jolene Marsh. She arrived late to intro to business carrying a motorcycle helmet under one arm and smelling faintly of engine oil. The professor pointed her toward the only empty seat, which happened to be beside me. She dropped into the chair, glanced at the dark circles under my eyes, and said, "You look like you've been awake since last Tuesday." I stared at her. "Feels about right." She nodded. "Good. I hate energetic people." I laughed despite myself. By the end of class, we were talking like old friends. Jolene worked at her uncle's auto shop during the day and attended classes at night. She understood exhaustion. She understood what it felt like to fight for every inch of progress. More importantly, she never looked at me with pity. She looked at me like she expected me to succeed. That was a rare gift. Months turned into years. Slowly, my life began taking shape. It wasn't easy. It wasn't glamorous. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks and mornings I wondered how much longer I could keep going. But I did keep going. Because every step forward felt like another brick laid in the foundation of a future nobody could take away from me. What I didn't know then was that while I was rebuilding my life, my family was telling a completely different story about me. According to my mother, I was stubborn, irresponsible, and incapable of appreciating everything they'd done for me. According to my father, I had chosen the hard road for no reason. According to Vanessa, I had abandoned the family. They were wrong about all of it. But I wouldn't learn how dangerous those lies had become until years later. Back then, I was too busy surviving. And survival, as it turned out, was only the beginning. By the time I turned 20, I had convinced myself that the hardest part of my life was behind me. I had survived leaving home. I had earned my GED. I was balancing work and college classes without falling apart completely. For the first time in years, my future looked like something I could actually reach. Then I met Marcus Delaney. Looking back now, I understand exactly why I fell for him. It wasn't because he was extraordinary. It was because he arrived at exactly the moment I was exhausted enough to mistake attention for love. Marcus was 23, confident, handsome, and the kind of man who always seemed to know what to say. We met at a charity fundraiser hosted by the community college. I was working the event as part of a student volunteer program, carrying trays of drinks and trying not to spill anything on important people. Marcus walked up to the refreshment table, smiled at me, and said, "You look like you're doing all the work around here." It was a simple comment. Harmless. But after years of feeling invisible, being noticed felt dangerous. We started dating a few weeks later. At first, everything seemed easy. Marcus opened doors. Remembered little details. Brought me coffee during study sessions. He made me feel chosen, and for someone who had spent most of her life feeling like second place, that mattered more than I wanted to admit. Jolene wasn't impressed. About 3 months into the relationship, she watched Marcus spend an entire dinner talking about himself and then asked me afterward, "Does he ever ask questions?" I laughed. "Of course he does." She raised an eyebrow. "Name 3. I couldn't. At the time, I told myself she was being protective. Now I know she was paying attention. We got married when I was 21. Small courthouse ceremony. No family from my side attended. I didn't invite them. They wouldn't have come anyway. Marcus's parents showed up. Jolene served as my witness. There were no flowers. No fancy dress. No photographer. Just a judge, a few signatures, and 2 people promising to build a life together. For a while, I thought we were. We rented a small apartment. Shared bills. Argued about dishes and laundry like every other young couple. Then we started trying for a baby. At first, it was exciting. We talked about names. Nursery colors. Future birthdays. Every month brought new hope. Every month ended in disappointment. After nearly 2 years, the disappointment became impossible to ignore. I scheduled an appointment with a fertility specialist. Marcus refused to come. "There's nothing wrong with me," he said. "Maybe you're the problem." The words hit harder than I expected. I laughed awkwardly because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Over the next year, he repeated that sentence so many times I lost count. Every negative test became my fault. Every failed appointment became my burden. Every tear I shed became evidence that I was weak. The man who once made me feel chosen slowly transformed into someone who treated me like a broken appliance. Then the late nights started. The unexplained absences. The smell of whiskey on his clothes. Perfume that wasn't mine. I ignored the signs longer than I should have because I wanted the marriage to work. I wanted something in my life to work. One night, I finally confronted him. I stood in our kitchen holding his phone after finding messages from another woman. My hand shook so badly I could barely speak. How long? I asked. Marcus didn't even deny it. He looked annoyed, like I had interrupted his evening. Can you blame me? He said. I married a woman who can't even give me a child. For a moment, I honestly thought I might collapse. Not because of the affair. Not because of the betrayal. Because I realized he genuinely believed my pain justified his cruelty. We divorced 6 months later. The process was quick. Cold. Efficient. Like dismantling furniture neither person wanted anymore. When the papers were finalized, I moved into a tiny apartment on the edge of town. The silence there was overwhelming. No husband. No family. No future I had planned for. Just me. I remember standing in the middle of the living room surrounded by unopened boxes and wondering if maybe my family had been right all along. Maybe I really was a failure. Maybe everyone who left had simply recognized something broken inside me before I did. Then my phone rang. It was my mother. Her first call in almost a year. For one foolish second, I thought she might be checking on me. Instead she said, "I told you so." That was it. No concern. No comfort. Just satisfaction. After she hung up, I sat on the floor and cried until my eyes hurt. But sometime around 2 in the morning, after all the tears were gone, something changed. I realized I had spent years trying to earn love from people who only valued me when I was useful. My parents. Marcus. All of them. And for the first time, I stopped asking what was wrong with me. I started asking what would happen if I finally bet on myself. That question would change everything. The morning after I decided to stop asking what was wrong with me and start asking what would happen if I believed in myself, nothing magical happened. No inspirational music played. No opportunity landed in my lap. I still had bills. I still had student loans. I still had an apartment that felt far too empty after the divorce. But something inside me had changed. For the first time in years, I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. I stopped hoping my parents would wake up and realize what they had done. I stopped imagining Marcus showing up at my door with an apology. Instead, I focused on the only thing I could control, myself. I threw everything into school. Every spare hour went toward classes, assignments, and building a future that belonged entirely to me. 2 years later, at 26, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration. I remember standing backstage before the ceremony, adjusting my graduation gown and looking around at families filling the auditorium. Parents carried flowers. Grandparents took photographs. Entire rows of seats were reserved for proud relatives. My section remained empty. No mother. No father. No sister. No husband. Nobody. For a brief moment, the old pain returned. Then I spotted Jolene waving both arms from the third row like she was trying to direct traffic. Beside her sat Denise, Kayla's mother, and 2 co-workers from Briarwood Diner. They were cheering loud enough for 10 people. Suddenly the empty seats didn't matter. After graduation, I accepted a junior analyst position at a small real estate development company in Ridgemont. The salary wasn't impressive, but the education was priceless. I learned everything I could. Zoning laws. Market analysis. Construction budgets. Contractor negotiations. Permit applications. I became obsessed with understanding how communities were built. Most employees left at 5 o'clock. I stayed until 7. Sometimes 8. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew opportunities rarely appeared for people like me. If I wanted one, I would have to create it myself. Over the next 3 years, I climbed steadily through the company. Promotions came. Raises followed. Yet something always felt incomplete. I wasn't building my dream. I was building someone else's. One rainy Thursday evening, I called Jolene. "I think I'm going to start a company," I told her. Silence. Then laughter. That's either the smartest thing you've ever said or the dumbest. Probably both. Good. When do we start? That's how Crestline Development was born. Not in a corporate boardroom. Not through investors. Just two women sitting at a diner booth with coffee refills and a legal pad covered in bad handwriting. We pooled our savings. Every dollar we had. It wasn't much. Barely enough to purchase our first property, a rundown foreclosure on the edge of Elmdale. The house was a disaster. Water damage. Broken windows. Mold in 2 rooms. The bank practically seemed relieved to get rid of it. Jolene walked through the front door, looked around at the collapsing drywall, and grinned. Perfect. I thought she was insane. 3 months later, we sold that property for nearly double what we'd invested. Then we bought another. And another. Every success funded the next project. Every mistake became a lesson. There were nights we slept in the office because we couldn't afford delays. There were weeks when payroll came before our own paychecks. More than once I sat at my desk wondering if we were one bad decision away from losing everything. But we kept going. 5 years passed faster than I expected. Crestline grew from 2 women and a folding table into a respected development company. We hired employees. Expanded operations. Took on larger projects. Revenue crossed 7 figures. The business publications started calling. Local chambers of commerce invited me to speak. I declined most invitations. Not because I lacked confidence. Because I valued privacy. More specifically, I didn't want my family attached to my success. Back home, they still believed I was struggling. According to Vanessa's social media posts, she was the successful daughter. The college graduate. The pride of the family. I never corrected anyone. It wasn't worth the energy. Let them believe whatever they wanted. Success doesn't become more real because someone applauds it. Then one afternoon, everything changed. We were reviewing bids for our biggest project yet, Maplewood Commons. 40 residential units spread across 12 acres. A development worth millions. The project that could elevate Crestline into an entirely different league. As we reviewed contractors, one company stood above the rest, Patterson Construction. Strong reputation. Experienced crews. Competitive pricing. I nodded. Looks good. Jolene hesitated. You know who owns Patterson, right? I frowned. Should I? She slid a file toward me. Frank Patterson. Father of Derek Patterson. Derek Patterson. Vanessa's fiancé. I stared at the name. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jolene leaned back in her chair. Well, she said carefully, that's awkward. I looked out the window at the city skyline. The irony was almost funny. The family who spent years treating me like a failure had absolutely no idea their future financial security was about to depend on the daughter they never bothered to know. And somehow, deep down, I had a feeling fate wasn't finished with us yet. For almost 6 years after launching Crestline Development, I had no contact with my family beyond the occasional rumor that somehow found its way back to me. According to people from my hometown, Vanessa was doing wonderfully. She had graduated from college, worked a comfortable corporate job, and recently become engaged to Derek Patterson, the son of one of the most respected construction company owners in the region. Every update sounded like another chapter in the story my parents had always wanted. Vanessa the success. Vanessa the golden child. Vanessa the daughter worth investing in. Strangely, I no longer felt angry when I heard those things. Time has a way of dulling old wounds. Or maybe success had given me something more valuable than revenge, distance. I was too busy running Crestline to care what version of me my family was still discussing over holiday dinners. At least, that's what I told myself. Then the wedding invitation arrived. It showed up on a Thursday afternoon in a cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. I almost threw it away without opening it. The return address alone made my stomach tighten. Lindgren family residence. The same house I had walked away from 15 years earlier. The same house where I learned exactly how much I was worth to the people who raised me. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before finally opening it. Inside was an invitation to Vanessa and Derek's wedding. Formal attire required. Reception to follow at Oak Ridge Country Club. There was no handwritten note. No personal message. No apology. Just a standard invitation mailed to me like I was a distant cousin rather than a sister. That evening, I dropped the invitation onto Jolene's desk. She looked at it, looked at me, and immediately groaned. Absolutely not. I haven't said anything yet. You don't have to. She picked up the invitation like it was contaminated. This is a trap. I sat down across from her. It's my sister's wedding. Your sister hasn't called you in years. I know. Your parents didn't even acknowledge your graduation. I know. Then why are we discussing this? Because despite everything, there was still a small part of me that wanted something impossible. Closure. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just one evening where I could walk into a room filled with people who had spent years hearing lies about me and prove I wasn't who my family said I was. Maybe they've changed, I said quietly. Jolene laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. That's adorable. Jolene. Thea, people don't invite someone they've ignored for 15 years because they've suddenly discovered emotional maturity. She leaned forward. They invited you because they need an audience. The worst part was that she was probably right. For several days, I ignored the invitation. Then one night I found myself sitting alone on my porch reading it again. The longer I stared at those gold letters, the more certain I became that I needed to go. Not for them. For me. 15 years earlier, I had left that family without ever truly defending myself. I had spent years building a life while they built a narrative. Maybe it was finally time to stop running from it. The next morning, I mailed back the RSVP card. Accepts with pleasure. When Jolene found out, she looked like someone had informed her I was voluntarily boarding a sinking ship. Fine, she said. But if this turns into a disaster, I reserve the right to say I told you so for the rest of our lives. Fair. She studied me for a moment. You're preparing for something, aren't you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up a folder I'd been quietly assembling for weeks. Inside were photographs, business awards, project renderings, and company achievements. Evidence. Not because I planned to show them off. Because experience had taught me that people like my family often became cruel when given a stage. Jolene's expression slowly changed. Oh. Exactly. You really think they'd do something? I thought about my mother. My father. Vanessa. Then I nodded. I think they've spent 15 years telling a story about me. Jolene crossed her arms. And if they tell it again? I opened my phone and showed her a drafted message containing a single word. Begin. Her eyes widened. Seriously? If I send that text, Tyler activates the presentation. Tyler Briggs handled audiovisual services for several major venues, including Oak Ridge Country Club. He also happened to be one of Crestline's trusted contractors. The presentation wasn't cruel. It wasn't revenge. It was simply the truth. Every achievement. Every milestone. Every fact my family never bothered to learn. Jolene stared at me for several seconds. I hope you don't need it. I looked down at the screen. So did I. But deep inside, I had a feeling that after 15 years of silence, my family wasn't inviting me to celebrate. They were inviting me to play a role. They just didn't realize I was done being the villain in their version of the story. The morning of Vanessa's wedding arrived with clear skies and the kind of weather people describe as perfect. I hated that. There was something unsettling about beautiful days attached to painful memories. By noon, I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror adjusting a navy blue dress I had almost talked myself out of buying. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to attract attention. It simply made me feel confident. And after everything that had happened in my life, confidence felt more valuable than diamonds. Before leaving, I checked my phone one last time. There was a text from Jolene. Still time to fake food poisoning. I smiled despite myself. Too late. Her reply came immediately. Then remember. One text. I stared at the word begin saved in my drafts folder and slipped the phone into my purse. Oak Ridge Country Club looked exactly like the kind of place my mother would love. White stone entrance. Perfect gardens. Valets in matching uniforms. Everything polished and expensive. The ceremony itself was held inside a small chapel overlooking the golf course. I arrived quietly and took a seat near the back. Nobody from my family acknowledged me. Not my mother. Not my father. Not Vanessa. It was as if I were a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. Oddly enough, that hurt less than I expected. 15 years earlier, I would have spent the entire ceremony wondering why. Now I simply observed. Vanessa looked beautiful. My father looked proud. My mother looked triumphant. Together they resembled a family portrait from a magazine advertisement. Perfect from a distance. Carefully cropped to hide everything broken. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception hall. The room was enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White linens covered every table. Fresh flowers filled the air with a faint floral scent. I checked the seating chart near the entrance. It took only a few seconds to find my name. Table 14. The very last table in the room. Located beside the service hallway leading toward the restrooms. I laughed quietly. Of course. Some things never changed. While the bridal party sat near the dance floor under elegant lighting, I found myself surrounded by distant relatives, elderly family friends, and people who clearly had no idea who I was. The message couldn't have been more obvious if they'd printed it on the invitation. You don't belong here. About 30 minutes later, my mother finally approached. She looked me up and down before offering a thin smile. Oh. You came. You invited me. That's a pretty dress. Her eyes drifted toward the fabric. Was it on sale? Then she walked away before I could answer. Across the room, I saw Jolene's prediction unfolding exactly as expected. This wasn't reconciliation. It was theater. During dinner, the speeches began. My father went first. He stood beside the microphone holding a glass of champagne. Vanessa, he said proudly, you've always been the daughter who made us believe anything was possible. The room applauded. My mother wiped away a theatrical tear. Every compliment felt carefully chosen. Every story highlighted Vanessa's accomplishments while quietly reminding everyone that she had succeeded where others had not. Then my mother took the microphone. As parents, she said, we learn very quickly where our efforts are best invested. The room laughed politely. I felt my stomach tighten. She continued talking about Vanessa's achievements, her intelligence, her determination. By the time she finished, the audience practically viewed my sister as royalty. Then Vanessa stepped forward. The moment I saw the smile on her face, something inside me went cold. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't excitement. It was anticipation. The expression of someone preparing for a performance. Before cake, she announced, I wanted to do something fun. Guests laughed. Cameras lifted. Most of you know my older sister, Thea. Every eye in the room turned toward me. My pulse quickened. Vanessa pointed directly at my table. Stand up, Thea. I remained seated. She laughed. Still shy. More laughter followed. Then she continued. Growing up, my sister taught me a lot. Mostly what not to do. The room erupted again. My mother smiled. My father looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Vanessa paced slowly across the stage. You know, some people are examples. Others are warnings. More laughter. Then she nodded toward the audiovisual booth. Hit it. The massive screen behind her flickered to life. The first word appeared in giant white letters. Infertile. A graphic of an empty crib appeared underneath. The room laughed. My throat tightened. Then another word appeared. Divorced. More laughter. Failure. Dropout. Broke. Alone. Each word hit harder than the last. Every private wound. Every painful chapter of my life. Reduced to entertainment. 200 people stared at the screen. Some laughed because everyone else was laughing. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed genuinely amused. Across the room, my mother raised her wine glass. My father stared at the floor. Vanessa grinned like she'd just delivered the perfect joke. In that moment, something became crystal clear. I hadn't been invited because they missed me. I hadn't been invited because they wanted healing. I had been invited because every family story needs a villain. And they expected me to play the role one last time. My phone vibrated. A single message from Jolene appeared. Say the word. I looked at the screen. 6 labels. 6 lies. 15 years of judgment condensed into one humiliating presentation. Then I looked at my family. None of them seemed ashamed. None of them seemed uncertain. They genuinely believed they were right. Slowly, I unlocked my phone. Opened the draft. And typed one word. Begin. The strange thing about humiliation is that it feels endless while it's happening. Sitting at table 14 watching those 6 words glow across the giant screen, I could feel 200 sets of eyes on me. Some were amused. Some were uncomfortable. A few looked genuinely embarrassed for me. But none of that mattered anymore. The moment I pressed send on that single word, something shifted inside me. For 15 years, I had allowed my family to tell my story. 15 years of silence. 15 years of letting people assume they knew who I was because of what someone else said. That ended the second the message left my phone. At first, nothing happened. Vanessa continued smiling. The audience continued laughing. My mother leaned toward one of her friends and whispered something that made both of them grin. My father stared into his champagne glass, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Then the screen blinked. Once. The slideshow paused. Vanessa glanced toward the audiovisual booth. Looks like we're having technical difficulties, she joked. A few guests chuckled. The screen went black completely. For 3 seconds, the room sat in silence. Then the display returned. But this time, it wasn't Vanessa's presentation. A clean white background appeared with a single question written across the center. High school dropout? The room grew quiet. Beneath the question appeared a photograph of my GED certificate. Then another image faded onto the screen beside it. My bachelor's degree. My name clearly visible. The audience stopped laughing. Vanessa frowned. What is this? She asked into the microphone. Nobody answered. The next slide appeared. Broke? Underneath the word appeared the Crestline Development logo. Then photographs of completed residential projects. Revenue numbers. Awards. Recognition from local business organizations. Several people in the room immediately recognized the company name. I watched heads turn. Whispers spread through nearby tables. Confusion replaced amusement. Across the room, Derek Patterson sat forward in his chair. His father Frank narrowed his eyes at the screen. Recognition flickered across his face. The third slide appeared. Failure? A photograph of me standing on stage accepting a regional business award filled the screen. Beside it appeared headlines from local publications featuring Crestline's growth, community development initiatives, housing projects, job creation statistics. The room had become completely silent. No laughter. No jokes. No smirks. Just shock. Vanessa lowered the microphone slightly. "Who is doing this?" she demanded. I slowly stood. Every movement seemed louder than normal. The scrape of my chair echoed across the ballroom. 200 people watched as I walked toward the stage. Not rushing. Not angry. Just calm. By the time I reached the front of the room, another slide appeared. Alone? A photograph of the entire Crestline team filled the screen. Employees smiling beside completed projects. Community events. Charity fundraisers. People who had chosen to become family. People who actually knew me. I stopped beside the stage and looked up at the screen. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. "You forgot a few details," I said quietly. The microphone picked up every word. Her face turned pale. "Thea, you spent years telling everyone who I was." I looked toward the audience. I figured maybe they deserved the whole story. My mother stood up immediately. "This is inappropriate." I almost laughed. Inappropriate. Not the slideshow mocking infertility. Not the public humiliation. Not 15 years of lies. The truth. Apparently that was inappropriate. Another slide appeared behind me. It displayed 6 new words. Survivor. Graduate. Founder. Employer. Leader. Still here. The room remained silent. Then someone began clapping. One person. Then another. Then several more. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. Across the ballroom, I noticed Mrs. Whitaker, one of my former teachers, standing beside her table applauding. Others joined her. My father's expression crumpled slightly. Not from anger. From realization. For the first time all evening, he looked directly at me. Really looked at me. The way a parent should. Then Frank Patterson suddenly stood up. His eyes remained fixed on the Crestline logo displayed behind me. "Wait," he said loudly. "Crestline Development?" Several guests turned toward him. Frank looked from the screen to me and back again. "You're the owner?" I nodded. The room exploded into whispers. Derek stared at me in disbelief. Vanessa looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. My mother opened her mouth but no sound emerged. Frank's face drained of color. Because unlike everyone else in that ballroom, he immediately understood what this meant. Crestline wasn't just a successful company. Crestline was the company preparing to award the largest development contract Patterson Construction had ever pursued. Suddenly, the wedding was no longer the biggest event happening in the room. The truth was. And for the first time in 15 years, my family wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. The silence inside the ballroom felt heavier than any applause could have. A few minutes earlier, Vanessa had been standing at the center of the room, controlling every eye, every laugh, every moment. Now she looked completely lost. The microphone hung loosely in her hand. Her carefully planned performance had turned into something she couldn't stop. Around the room, guests whispered to each other. Some were staring at the screen. Others were staring at me. But most of them were staring at my family. Because for the first time, people weren't asking who Thea Lindgren was. They were asking why her own family had worked so hard to convince everyone she was a failure. Frank Patterson suddenly reached into his jacket pocket. His phone had begun vibrating. He glanced down at the screen, frowned, and opened the message. The color drained from his face almost immediately. Derek noticed. "Dad?" Frank didn't answer. He continued reading. Then he read it again. Slowly. Carefully. As though hoping the words would change. Finally he looked up at me. What is this? His voice wasn't angry. Not yet. It sounded stunned. Check the sender, I replied calmly. His eyes dropped back to the phone. Crestline Development Legal Department. The room remained silent. What happened? Derek asked. Frank swallowed hard. The Maplewood contract. My mother stiffened instantly. Vanessa looked confused. What about it? Frank's jaw tightened. It's gone. The room erupted into whispers. Vanessa blinked. What do you mean it's gone? Frank held up the phone. The letter of intent has been withdrawn. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then understanding hit several people at once. The same realization spreading through the room like a shockwave. Crestline wasn't just some company logo on a screen. Crestline was the company funding the largest business opportunity Patterson Construction had ever seen. And Crestline belonged to me. Vanessa's face went pale. No, her voice cracked. No, you can't do that. I looked at her quietly. Actually, I can. You're destroying my wedding. The accusation hung in the air. For a second, I almost laughed. No, Vanessa. My voice remained calm. You did that when you turned my infertility into entertainment. The room fell silent again. Derek slowly stepped away from his bride. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just enough to create space between them. Vanessa noticed immediately. Derek, did you tell me this slideshow was harmless? He asked quietly. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Did you tell me it was just a few jokes? Her eyes filled with panic. I didn't think, no, Derek interrupted. You didn't. Across the room, my mother suddenly stood. Thea, stop this right now. Stop what? This embarrassment. For the first time all night, I felt something close to anger. Embarrassment? I repeated. You sat there smiling while your daughter mocked the worst moments of my life. My mother's expression hardened. It was a joke. Infertility isn't a joke. I took a step forward. Abandonment isn't a joke. Divorce isn't a joke. 15 years of lies aren't jokes. She looked away first. My father remained seated the entire time. Silent. The same silence that had followed me my entire life. The same silence that allowed every terrible thing to happen because speaking up was inconvenient. Then, unexpectedly, he stood. The room grew quiet again. He looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Not physically. Spiritually. Like years of avoiding responsibility had finally caught up to him. Gloria, he said softly. My mother turned toward him. What? Stop. The single word hit harder than shouting would have. My mother stared at him in disbelief. Ray? Stop. He looked toward me. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he lowered his eyes. Not out of shame alone. Out of recognition. For the first time in 15 years, my father looked like a man realizing exactly what he had lost. Nearby, Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward. She had taught me English in high school before I left home. If anyone should be embarrassed tonight, she said clearly, it isn't Thea. Several guests nodded. Others murmured agreement. The momentum in the room had completely shifted. Vanessa could feel it. My mother could feel it. Everyone could. The story they had spent years telling was collapsing. Not because I attacked them. Because the truth had finally entered the room. I picked up my purse and turned toward the exit. Thea, Vanessa called desperately. I stopped but didn't turn around. What? You're really leaving? I almost smiled. I was never supposed to stay. Then I walked toward the doors. No rushing. No dramatic exit. Just a woman finally leaving a table where she had never been welcome. Behind me, the reception continued unraveling. But for the first time in my life, it wasn't my responsibility to fix it. 3 months after Vanessa's wedding, the story still hadn't died. In a small town, scandals don't disappear. They settle into conversations. They drift through coffee shops, church parking lots, grocery store aisles, and neighborhood barbecues. People stopped me occasionally when I visited town for business meetings. Some apologized for laughing during the slideshow. Others admitted they had believed every rumor my family told about me for years. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry anymore. I had spent most of my life wanting people to understand me. After the wedding, I realized something important. Understanding wasn't my responsibility. Living honestly was. Everything else belonged to them. Maplewood Commons broke ground 6 weeks after the wedding. Crestline signed a contract with a different construction company, one that had impressed us from the beginning but hadn't originally won the bid. The project moved forward smoothly. New homes rose from empty land. Streets took shape. Sidewalks appeared. Every time I visited the site, I felt proud. Not because of the money. Not because of the success. Because I remembered being 17 years old with $83 and nowhere to go. Back then, survival had felt impossible. Now I was helping build neighborhoods. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. Jolene noticed the difference in me first. One afternoon, we were walking through Maplewood wearing hard hats while crews worked nearby. She nudged my shoulder and said, "You're lighter." "What does that mean?" "You don't look like you're carrying a house on your back anymore." I laughed. "Maybe I finally put it down." She nodded. About time. The truth was, she was right. For years, my family occupied space inside my head they hadn't earned. Every achievement felt incomplete because they weren't there to see it. Every milestone carried a small ache because I knew they would never celebrate it. But after the wedding, something changed. I stopped chasing validation from people who had already decided who I was. I stopped performing for an audience that wasn't paying attention. I started enjoying my life. Really enjoying it. Crestline continued growing. We launched a mentorship program for young women rebuilding after setbacks. Women leaving difficult marriages. Women returning to school later in life. Women trying to start over. I called the program Foundation Forward because every strong structure begins with a foundation, and sometimes rebuilding isn't about fixing what broke. It's about creating something stronger than before. Meanwhile, life wasn't nearly as kind to my family. According to local gossip, Vanessa and Derek entered marriage counseling almost immediately after the wedding. Trust had become a problem. Apparently, public humiliation isn't a strong foundation for a healthy relationship. My mother switched churches after months of uncomfortable conversations and cold receptions from people who had witnessed or heard about the slideshow. The same community she spent years influencing no longer viewed her the same way. My father retired early. I heard he spent more time fishing and less time talking. Part of me wondered whether he was finally confronting the choices he'd spent decades avoiding. Then, 4 months after the wedding, my phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello?" Silence. Then a familiar voice. Older somehow. Smaller. "Hi, Thea." "Hi, Dad." Another pause. "I saw Maplewood." "Yeah? It looks incredible." I looked out at the sunset beyond my porch. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. I've been trying to figure out what to say. "That's new." A small laugh escaped him. "I deserve that." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. "I failed you." The statement landed softly but carried years of weight. "Dad, no. Let me finish." His voice trembled. I kept telling myself staying quiet was keeping peace. But all I really did was make sure you fought every battle alone. Tears filled my eyes before I realized it. I should have stood up for you. I closed my eyes. For years I had imagined hearing those words. Yet now that they were finally here, they didn't erase anything. They couldn't. But they mattered. Thank you for saying that, I whispered. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I looked toward the horizon. Thought about the girl who left home with $83. Thought about the woman standing on a construction site watching dreams become reality. Then I answered honestly. I think I'm working on it. He exhaled slowly. That's more than I deserve. When the call ended, I sat quietly for a long time. Not sad. Not angry. Just peaceful. Because forgiveness, I realized, isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about refusing to let it control the future. Today, as I tell this story, I am no longer the girl sitting at table 14. I'm no longer the dropout. The divorcee. The failure. The cautionary tale. Those labels belong to people who never bothered learning the truth. If I had to choose 6 words to describe myself now, they would be simple. Survivor. Graduate. Founder. Mentor. Builder. Free. And that last one matters most. Because the greatest thing I gained wasn't success. It wasn't money. It wasn't even vindication. It was freedom from needing approval from people who never intended to give it. My family called me a failure at my sister's wedding. But the truth is, failure isn't being underestimated. Failure is spending your entire life believing the people who underestimate you. And thankfully, I stopped believing them a very long time ago.